Go with me back to the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, where we ended last week at the end of chapter 2. We're going to look today at 1 through 22, the entirety of chapter 3. Towards the end of chapter 2, as he is talking about his pursuit of joy, his pursuit of the good life, he comes back around again to this idea of our own death, of our own mortality, that one day, no matter what you do, that you're going to die, and that you're going to have to give up all the works of your hands to somebody else. And it brings him to this idea that he expounds on in chapter 3, this idea of times and seasons in life, the temporary nature of life, that time is fleeting for all of us, that time is temporary, that nobody in this life is going to live forever, that death is going to come to all of us. You'll notice as we read this morning that chapter 3 is, like many places in Ecclesiastes, it is often quoted. It is, maybe this poem in the first 8 verses is the most known, just sort of widely in our culture, section of Ecclesiastes. Lots of people are familiar with this poem, a season for everything under heaven. I want you to listen as we read, that you might have eyes to see and ears to hear, what the preacher is teaching us about human experience in this world. Let's read beginning in verse 1 of chapter 3. He writes, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to tear, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is, already has been. That which is to be, already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart, with regard to the children of man, that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beast, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. And who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of beast goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? He says that there is a time for everything there is a season. There is some deep truth here that the preacher hits on that resonates with nearly every generation of humans that have read these words ever since their writing. It's the sort of thing that when you read it, you feel it, maybe even before you fully understand what he's saying. You read, you can feel and resonate these truths about what it means to live life in this world. In the mid-50s, Peter Seeger wrote maybe the song that you're familiar with called Turn, 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 which almost in its entirety reproduces this poem from chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. It became popular in the mid-60s, in 1965, when the Byrds covered this song by Peter Seeger. It was in the midst of the mid-60s, of all the social upheaval and the changing culture, and particularly the Vietnam War, that this song, Turn, 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 from Ecclesiastes 3, became sort of the theme song for the anti-war protesters as they were seeking a time for peace. In fact, one of the only lines in the entire song that does not come directly from Ecclesiastes 3 is the very end of the song, where Peter Seeger plays off that last line, a time for war and a time for peace. And then he says, I swear it's not too late. This truth about the world and about time still resonates with us. Why is it that what this preacher wrote some maybe close to 3,000 years ago, why is it that it still resonates with the world? What is it that he is saying about time and about the seasons of life that feels so intuitive to us even before we read it in his words? He's speaking about time, about life, about this universal human experience, and that is the passage of time, the moving of time. Every human who has ever lived in this world has experienced the passage of time, and they do so without choice. No one gets to decide whether they want to participate in the passage of time. It comes to all of us. And yet, despite the fact that every human who has ever lived has experienced this, even still, we don't really know what to do with it. We don't know how to think about time, how to handle it, how to understand it. We certainly don't know how to enjoy time, that we struggle with this passage of time, that it is for us, in many ways, a weight around our neck. You can see just even in the ways that we talk about time, we are fascinated with changing and controlling, with saving time, with life hacks that make our lives easier. There's an old Jerry Seinfeld bit where he talks about saving time, and he says, we do all of these things in our life to save us time. You buy the no iron shirts, and you buy instant coffee, and you buy all these things that are supposed to save you time. And he says there is this great scam that happens in all these time-saving devices, because he says when you get to the end of your life, when it's time to die, you'll find out there's no extra time. He says, why is there no extra time? He says, because every time you waste time, they subtract it. No matter how much time you save, you don't actually get any extra. The preacher tells us this really important truth about time, that in a world that is absurd, remember this is what the whole book is saying, that this world is vanity, all is vanity. It is absurd, it is disappointing, it is frustrating, it is confusing, it is unfulfilling, that it doesn't quite live up to what we wish it did, that in a world that is absurd, the writer is saying that time itself is absurd, that it will be a source of frustration and pain. And here's the main truth I want you to get about time from chapter 3. Time never stops. This is the point of the poem in verses 1 through 9. It's this incredibly self-evident truth, one, though, that despite the fact that it is so obvious to us, it is a truth that we often just willingly ignore, that we cannot stop time. That it's what the poet is wrestling with in these first 8 verses, this aspect of time. He says in verse 1, there is a season for everything. There's a time for every matter under heaven. And then in verses 2 through 8, he gives us 14 pairs of different seasons, different things that come to us in our life. Almost all of them are a positive and a negative paired together, a thing that you might want and a thing that you don't want, that taken together span, in many ways, the entirety of human experience, that he's giving us the extremes to talk about everything that would happen to us under the sun. He talks about birth and death, war and peace, weeping and laughing, love and hatred. I want you to see that his point in this poem is much more than what maybe you have thought before. Many people read this poem and they say, well, the point of this is sometimes life is good and sometimes life is bad. Yeah, sometimes you're born and sometimes you die. Sometimes there's war and sometimes there's peace. Sometimes there's weeping and sometimes there's laughing. Now that's certainly true. And in fact, it is a part of what the preacher has been saying and is going to say throughout the book, that sometimes life is good and sometimes life is bad. But the point of this poem is not merely that. In fact, I think the point is much deeper than that, is much heavier than that he is leaning towards not just the good and the bad of this life, but he is leaning towards this truth, that time itself is relentless. That no matter what you do, time is always going to keep moving. That this is the image that he's giving us, that as he names each of these seasons, this is the point, that as one season comes, that eventually the next season will push out that season. That there is a time to be born, and the time to be born is going to be pushed out by the time to die. And then what's going to happen? The time to die will be pushed out by the time to be born. That there is a time for peace, and what will happen? The time for war will push out that season. And then what will happen? The time for peace will push out the time for war. That this is the point of the poem, is that the seasons never stop. This cyclical nature of human experience in life, one season is always going to give way to another, that you cannot stop time, that one season is always going to push out the next. And no matter what you do, you can't slow it down. You can't stop it. You can't save it. And you can't bring it back. That even right now, in this moment, as we're in this room, time is still ticking away. I started a timer when we began this service. We are at 30 minutes and 9 seconds, 11 seconds, 14 seconds. Tick, tick, tick. Time is always moving, and it never stops, and there's not a thing that you can do to change it. One season is always going to give way to the next. You know, we like to use this phrase when something bad in our life happens. You ever said this to somebody, or somebody said this to you? This too shall pass. Something comes to you and somebody says, don't worry, this too shall pass. Have you ever considered the fact that that's true not just of the bad things that come to you in life? That's true of everything that comes to you in life. Now, I wouldn't encourage you to say that to your friend next time they're celebrating something. You say, well, don't worry, this too will pass. But he says, you have to understand, in a world that is absurd, time is always ticking. The next season is unstoppable. Do you feel the weight of that? Some of you parents that are sitting here today, that your children were on stage today as they're graduating, you probably feel the weight of the unstoppability of time, that the time is always ticking away. And one day your kids are going to grow up. That if the Lord tarries, you're going to grow old. That the world will change, that you will change, and you can't stop it. Nearly every day, multiple times a day, I get a notification on my phone from my Photos app. I haven't quite figured out how to turn it off, or I would. It almost always is just trying to make me cry. It's like, here's a picture of your kids 10 years ago when they were little babies, and I didn't ask for this. I don't want to be reminded that a lot has changed in the last decade, but yet every day I get these pictures and these reminders that sometimes what seems slow has actually passed very, very quickly. One season is always going to be pushed out by the other. That time is a river that does not stop. It is a runaway freight train. Now, why does the preacher tell us this? Is it simply to make you sad? That you would be depressed? That you would be in despair? That you would say, well, nothing matters then, that everything is nothing, if time can't be slowed down, if it can't be saved, if time never stops, if one season is always going to be pushed out by the next, then what does it matter? That there is no real joy in this life. Is this what we hear these truths for, just simply that we'll be depressed? No, I don't think so. He's telling you this that you might find real life, that you might, even in this absurd world, that you might find real peace, that you might find real satisfaction. He's telling you this, I think, so that you might ultimately find God. You can't do that by closing your eyes to the reality of the world. You can close your eyes and you can pretend that time isn't constantly moving, but it doesn't change anything. But the writer is saying the only way that you're going to find any satisfaction, any meaning, any peace, the only way that you're going to find God is by actually opening up your eyes and seeing just how bleak the situation really is. That he speaks of this absurdity of time, this absurdity that time never stops, with this goal in mind, that you would embrace every season of life. that you would learn to find joy and meaning and purpose in every season, in the time to be born, and the time to die, and the time for war, and the time for peace, and the time for mourning, and the time for laughing, that you would find meaning and purpose and joy, that you would learn to embrace, to hold on to, enjoy every moment that comes to you. There's a thread throughout the text where the writer speaks of beauty and joy and that which is good and pleasurable and rejoicing. That even as he's given us this depressing picture of time in the first 8 verses, he is saying that in light of that, it is possible, even in an absurd world where time never stops, it's possible to learn to embrace every season that God gives to you. There is a temptation for us to hear this truth of time in the first 8 verses and to feel the straitjacket that it is for us, to feel hemmed in by this truth and to want to kick against it, to want to try to fight against this reality, to fight the passing seasons and try to hold on to what we have. What happens when you do that, when you try to fight time, is you end up only longing for the future or pining for the past. That the moment, the right now, ends up completely ignored. You end up just thinking about what is going to come one day. You think, well, one day when I graduate, or one day when I get married, or one day when I have kids, or one day when the kids get older, or the kids move out of the house, or one day when work slows down, or one day when I make more money, or one day when I retire, that's when I'll be happy, and that's when I'll serve the Lord. That's when I'll be satisfied. That the best season in your mind is always the next one. You're waiting on what is to come. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you're only looking backward and you think, if only I could go back. If I could go back to when the kids were younger. If I could go back to when I was younger. If I could go back to when life was easier, when it was more comfortable, when it was more fun. If I could just go back there, then I'd be happy. When all you're doing is looking forward and looking back, what you do is you learn to despise the present moment that has been given to you. And in fact, you suck it dry of all meaning and purpose and joy when all you do is look forward and look back. You will never be satisfied kicking against the current of time. It is an unwinnable fight. Time will keep moving whether you want it to or not. And when you try to push back against time, all you do is rob the present moment of its joy and satisfaction. I think part of what the preacher is saying, that if you try that, it is like, as he said last week, it's like chasing the wind. It's like trying to hold on to the wind. You can expend a lot of energy, but at the end you will have nothing left in your hands. It will slip through your fingers. I think part of the reason that the world around us is constantly and perpetually unhappy and unsatisfied is because the world around us is longing always for a different season. They want to go to the next one or go back to the one that came before. They are chasing after the wind. And all of that is vanity, that everything is nothing. You can't hold on to time. But the preacher says, you can find a way to learn, by the goodness of God, to embrace every season of life. To not merely endure it or just to get through it or just to muddle your way through or to wait out the season of life. But I think he's writing to tell us that there is a way in this world, as absurd as it is, as difficult as time is for us, to find real joy and meaning and purpose and satisfaction in every season that comes for us. Why? Because there is a God. This has been the thread throughout the text. If there is no God, then there is no meaning in any season that comes into your life. If there is no God, then try as hard as you want. There is nothing, there's no joy, there's no satisfaction. You will find nothing in all that you're doing. But the writer is coming back to this truth again and again and again. There is a God, thus every season of your life you can learn to embrace, despite the fact that you can't stop it. The next season is going to come whether you want to or not. And he says you can learn to embrace what God has given you. This is the end of the matter, he says at the end of the book. Fear the Lord and keep his commandments. Because there is a God, you can learn to do this. This is my call to you this morning, that you would listen to these words from the preacher. That you would learn not to merely endure this life. To not give yourself over to only longing for that which is to come or pining for that which has already passed. But that you would learn, by the grace of God, to embrace every season that God has given to you. Whatever season you're in or whatever season is coming, you can embrace it and learn to enjoy it to the glory of God. Now, how does he teach us to do that? Number one, you must look for beauty in everything. He says in verse 9, having spelled out for us this truth about time, everything there's a season, every matter under heaven, that time is going to come whether we like it or not. And then he returns to this question in verse 9 that he asked both in chapter 1 and in chapter 2. As depressing as this truth is, the question is, well, then what point is there? What gain is there for the worker in his toil? What profit is there when all is said and done? When all is left over, what do you have profit? If you notice, there are 14 pairs in the poem, 14 positives and 14 negatives. When you take 14 and you minus 14, what do you get? For the math whizzes, you get 0. You get nothing. He says, it seems like there is no profit. What is it worth? What does it matter? He says, I've examined the business that God has given to man. I've experienced life under the sun that God has given the children of man to be busy with. And then he says in verse 11, He has made everything beautiful in its time. That there is a beauty in some mysterious way to every season of life. How do we know that? He says, because God has made it beautiful. He has made everything beautiful in its time. That He has put beauty into every season of life. That it is possible for us, even in this world, to find some semblance of beauty in every season. Maybe even that means the only beauty we find in a season is that season is just a season. That it's not going to stay. He says there's a way to look at the world, to embrace every season of life, and to find there a beauty. But I want you to notice, he gives us this call, verse 11. Everything is beautiful in its time. You can look for beauty in every season. But he gives us an important caveat, this instruction that is sort of the counterbalance to this. There is beauty in every season. But he says, in the second half of verse 11, also, He has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to the end. He says, there's beauty in every season. God has put it there. That's how we know it's there. But God has placed eternity in your heart, and all of your answers, essentially, is what he's saying, all of your answers in this life aren't going to get answered. He's put eternity in your heart. Yet man is not going to know what God has done from beginning to end. What is it that he's saying? He's saying that God, as He's made us in His image, God has given us an innate desire and longing, not for the temporary of this life, but He has given us this innate desire and longing for that which is eternal. We long for eternity, and nothing in this life will fully satisfy us. See, you take these two things together. Here's what he's saying. There's a beauty to every season in life. Everything is beautiful in its time. God has made it beautiful in its time. God has put a beauty into every season. But no season is beautiful enough to really fill you up. There's a beauty in every season, but no season in this life will ever truly fulfill you, because God has made you for eternity. God has put eternity into your heart, and you're not going to have all your questions answered in this life. There is a beauty in every season, but you'll only find that beauty when you recognize that you are made for eternity. You're not going to find the beauty of every season if you hold too tightly to it. I think about some of you in here are young moms. You've got a house full of little kids. And every day you're tired and you're stressed and you're wondering, am I doing this right? Are these kids going to turn out okay? There is this temptation to look to this season of life that you're in and to expect it to fulfill you, to expect it to satisfy you. Here's what he's saying. If you do that, it never will. That if you let this season of life become your identity, if mom is all you are, if this season has the weight and the pressure of it is supposed to fill you up, it's supposed to make you whole, it's supposed to satisfy you in an unending way, that it is all that you are, he's saying you'll never find beauty there. The more you grasp at it, the more you try to hold on to it, this is the irony of Ecclesiastes, the more it is going to slip through your fingers. But in fact, the more you hold it with open hands, the more you hold it loosely, that you'll find there's the beauty. The more that you look at what God has given you and you realize this is a season. It's a season with sorrows and joys, but it's just a season. It's not everything that there is, and it's not always going to be here. that when you do that, that's when you can begin to find beauty in the season. You find it somewhere in between the Cheerios and the laundry and the episodes of Bluey. When you figure out this right here, this is the gift. This is where the beauty is. This is a season, and these kids aren't going to be little forever. If you hold on to it, you'll never find it. But when you hold it loosely, when you see that God has made everything beautiful in its time, but nothing in this life is intended to satisfy you. Some of you have been looking forward to retirement for a long time. And you thought, when I get there, then I'll be happy. Once I have the financial freedom to do what I want and to travel, and I don't have to work, and I don't have a boss, when I get to retirement, then I'll be satisfied. I think the preacher says, if you're asking that of this season of life, you'll never find it. If you're expecting your retirement to fulfill you and to satisfy you and to make you happy and joyful and whole, he is saying you'll never find it. But if you realize it's just a season, just like every other season, if you'll hold it loosely, then you'll find there's beauty in it. Everything is beautiful in its time. The present moment is here, whether you like it or not. There's no use fighting it or arguing about it or wishing that it weren't so. The preacher says you can look for beauty in everything because God has placed it there. Look for beauty in everything and enjoy every gift that you've been given. He moves into 12 and 13. This idea, God has placed beauty in everything, and then he comes back to this idea that he spoke about in chapter 2. That the good life is not one that we find, the good life is one that we receive, that God gives us these things as gifts. That he says there in verse 12, I perceive that there is nothing better. That is, this is the good life. What is the good life for us? It's to be joyful, to do good as long as we live. That everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all of his toil. He says this is God's gift to man. This is the gift that God has given us, that we would enjoy the simple pleasures of life, that we would receive every season as a gift that has been given to us directly from God. There is no season that comes into our life that does not come to us from the hand of God. We receive everything as a gift. It is telling that throughout the book, the preacher again comes back again and again to the simple pleasures of life, to food and to drink and to work. He says you need to receive these things that God has given you. You need to receive them as gifts. They're gifts, and you need to treat them as such. That in fact, what we do with the gifts that God gives us says a lot about what we think about God. If you come to me after the service today and you hand me a gift, and I say to you, I don't like this, and I throw it on the ground and stomp on it, you'll be wounded, not just because of what I've said about your gift, but because what I've done with your gift says something about what I think about you. The psalmist, or the proverb says, every season comes to you, not through randomness, but it comes to you from the very hand of God. He says, this is God's gift to man, that we must learn to enjoy the simple gifts of life, food and drink and work. That means that we can learn to enjoy even the hard things in life. He has given us in the context of the time of war and the time of peace, the time of birth and the time of death, the time of weeping and the time of laughing, that you can learn to enjoy every season because every season is a gift, even the difficult ones that you wouldn't choose. Even the hard seasons, we believe that God is working, that God is using those for his own glory and for our good, that he intends to not send us difficult things to merely crush us, but he sends us difficult things that he might shape and mold us into the image of his Son. There are a handful of folks in our church that over the last year have walked through incredibly difficult seasons, that have suffered through sickness and cancer. Some of them have recovered. And some of them are recovering. And some of them, even this week, went home to be with Jesus. And yet, if you speak to them about this season of their life, what they'll tell you is they never would have picked this. This is not what they would have asked for from God. And in fact, they'd be happy to never have to do it again. This is not the season that they would have asked for from God, but they will tell you that even this season has been a gift. That God is using even their suffering to work. that even in the messiness and the pain and the sorrow, that God is still giving to them. It's giving them greater faith. God's giving them some real joy in a simple life. God is giving them greater enjoyment of the simple pleasures of this life. Every difficult season comes to us as a gift with potential for real joy. The preacher says you must learn to enjoy every gift that you've been given. It means that you learn to enjoy the gifts that God has given you that you want. But if we're honest, that we often take for granted. We overlook the good seasons. We feel entitled to them. We think God owes us these things. He says you should learn to enjoy the good gifts that God has given you. Eat and drink and enjoy your work. Enjoy the seasons that God has given to you. Don't take them for granted, but enjoy them to the glory of God. Nearly every single one of us has a nearly endless list of gifts which we can celebrate and enjoy that God has given to us in His graciousness. And learn to enjoy even the seasons that you don't want. The things that you wouldn't have chosen and that you wouldn't pick and that you wouldn't want to ever have to do again, because you believe that even there, God is at work. That even there, God is giving you a gift that you can seek joy in every season. Now, even as you hear that instruction, there is probably rising up in you a question. At least there ought to be. There is this sort of unsaid, implicit theological truth that runs underneath this whole passage, and in many ways, the entire book. You ought to be asking this question, well, what does God have to do with any of this? You've said that we're supposed to find beauty in every season, that I can enjoy every season of life. I can find even the good and the bad things. How is that possible? What does God have to do with this? This is only possible if all these things really and truly are from God who reigns. These things are only possible if meaning and beauty and enjoyment are given to us as gifts from God. They can only be found in every season of life if God, in His sovereign providence, has placed them there. If God is not on the throne, you may not find beauty in every season. If God is not on the throne, you may not be able to enjoy every season as a gift. But if you want to embrace every season of life that is given to you, you must submit to the God who reigns. I think the preacher anticipates this question. So he says in verse 14 and 15, having spoken about our work, what we do doesn't endure, that we are subject to all of the seasons of life, that one season is going to come and one season is going to go. And yet he says in verse 14, I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before Him. That he comes to this theological truth that is all throughout the Bible, that God reigns over all things, that He is the Lord of history, that He is God, that what He does endures forever, that is unlike us. That His purposes will stand, that His plans will not be thwarted, that we, like little tiny boats, are battered around by the waves of time. But he says that is not true of God. What He does endures forever, and no one can change it. You can't add to it, you can't take away from it. Notice even what he says. He has given us this image of time as this raging river, time as this runaway freight train. One season is always going to give way to the next, and you cannot stop it. And he says, who's driving the freight train that is going to hit us all? Verse 15. That which is already has been, and that which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. Here's what He's saying. This, literally, God is saying, He's just given us this image of one season driven away by another. And He says, who is it that keeps the cycle churning? It's God. God seeks that which is driven away, meaning it is God that brings the time for war back after the time of peace. And it's God who brings the time of peace back after the time of war. It is God who keeps the cycle churning. It is God who moves the wheels of history. It is God who is Lord over all things. It is God who sits on the throne. That God is God and you are not. The more you fight that truth, the more unhappy you'll be. In fact, if you fight that truth, I think the Bible says you'll never be happy. You'll never be satisfied. You'll never find any joy in this life. The longer you insist on believing that you control your life, the more miserable you'll be. There is this temptation to think for each of us, well, I'm the master of my life. I'm in control of what happens. I'm in charge of what happens to me. The Bible says that is a recipe for misery. In fact, time itself proves you're not in charge. Time itself proves you're not in control. You can do nothing to stop the passage of time. It is coming whether you like it or not. The more you grasp for control, the more you think that you're in charge, the book of Ecclesiastes says, the more that all control slips through your fingers. There is a great irony here. What is the only way that you're going to find peace? It is by submitting to the one who sits on the throne. It is by acknowledging that God is God and you are not. That God, in His righteousness and in His wisdom and in His kindness and in His care, that it is God who sits on the throne. And what do? We submit before Him. We lay ourselves before Him. He says God does what He does, and what God does endures forever. And He says in verse 14, God does this so that people will fear before Him. We would stand before God with a view towards His glory, towards His might, towards His sovereignty, towards His goodness. That we would live all of life before this God. This is the phrase that Luther and the other reformers used this phrase to describe the Christian life. They said that the Christian life could be summed up as coram Deo. That is literally the Christian life is lived before the face of God. That what is this life? They said this is the Christian life. It is understanding that everything you do is lived before the face of God. There are no hidden moments when God sits on the throne. Everything is before Him. They said this is what really you find joy and meaning in life, is when you realize there is no sacred and secular, that everything is before the face of God. Thus everything you do has weight, has meaning. And everything you do, every moment in your life, is an opportunity for joy, for satisfaction, not in and of itself, but satisfaction and joy that will come from God and God alone. Everything in this life is before Him. Everything is submitted to Him. We must live contented with this fact that God is God and I am not. That fact will give meaning to everything. In order to embrace every season of life, you must see that all of life is lived before the face of God. What God does endures, and He does this so that we will fear before Him. Now again, there arises for us another question. If we find meaning and purpose and beauty because God put it there, and the preacher says God is the one who drives time, God sits on the throne, God is the one who, when He works, what He does endures forever, that His plans cannot be thwarted, there is a question then that should come from that you should be asking. Well, can this God, who sits on the throne, who drives the wheels of history, can this God be trusted? Can this God be trusted to do that which is right? Can this God be trusted to deal with wickedness and injustice in the world? Can this God be trusted with my life? If you're saying, Pastor, that all of history is in the hands of God, that what He does endures forever, nobody can add to it and nobody can take away from it, and it is God who turns these wheels, we have to know, is this a God who can be trusted? If you want to learn to embrace every season of life, you must know not only that God reigns on the throne and submit your life to Him, you must trust Him to make everything right, to make it all right. He answers this question, I think, in verse 16 and 17. This is the natural question. We're living in an absurd world. We're living in a world that is messed up in so many ways. We're living in a world of wickedness and of sin, and this is what the preacher says. He says, "Moreover, I saw that under the sun, in the place of justice, there was wickedness, and the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness." He recognizes the absurdity of this. He's just said, God sits on the throne, and yet he says, when I look around, when I look and should find justice, when I look and should find righteousness, what do I find? I find wickedness. There would seem to be a question there. Well, maybe God isn't reigning, or maybe God isn't good. Notice what he says. I said in my heart that God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. That he says that in this world that is broken by sin, that we are going to experience deep wickedness. In fact, he says at the end of chapter 2 that the more we know of this world, the greater sorrow that we'll feel. Why? Because this world is messed up. But he believes that in the end, that God will judge. In this life, justice often will not come. And even when it seems to come, justice in this life is always incomplete. We can punish people in this world, but we cannot make all things new. This world is a deeply unjust place. I remember even just a few months ago reading about a pastor who committed a crime that was not just criminal, but was of such a perverse and wicked nature that even unbelievers know that it is an awful thing. And when his crime was found out, rather than facing justice, he took his own life to leave his family and his church and everybody else behind to pick up the pieces and to deal with the fallout from his sin. That is deeply wicked and incredibly unfair. It's very, in this life, unjust. You will experience in this life, nearly every day, the same sort of injustices. You will look for righteousness, and you will look for justice, and you will see wickedness. But the preacher says, I have said in my heart, God will judge the wicked and the righteous. That at the right time, that in the end of all things, that God is going to bring ultimate judgment. This ought to be an anchoring truth for all of us, that God is a righteous judge, that in the end, no injustice will stand forever, that every sin will be punished, either in hell or carried by Christ on the cross. No injustice, no sin stands forever. If that's not true, if there is no God, this life isn't just absurd, it's crushing, it's hopeless. If there is no God, the injustice of this world should cause us all to live in constant despair. But he says there is a God who will judge. The world is wicked, but at the right time, God will judge both the righteous and the wicked. And I think what he has in mind here is more than simple punishment, but that God is going to one day make all things new. He's going to judge the righteous and the wicked, that he is going to come, and that one day the scriptures tell us that all of this world is going to be rolled up, that judgment will come, that rescue will come, and that, as C.S. Lewis said, that all the sad things will come untrue. That Jesus Christ, the crucified and risen Lord, the one who is judge over all, is one day going to put all things under his feet. That he is one day going to end this cycle of all the seasons under the sun, that he'll put an end to time, and he'll make all things new. The preacher says if you want to learn to embrace every season of life, you have to know that you can trust this God to make it all right. You can embrace the seasons of justice and righteousness and the seasons when things seem unjust, because you believe that in the end, the God who sits on the throne is righteous and just and kind and wise, and judgment will come. That he sits on the throne and we do not. That we must remember our frailty. You want to embrace every season of life, you must remember your own death. You must remember your frailty. He ends the passage in 18 through 21 in what is admittedly a difficult section. It is jarring. It seems, maybe even at first glance, it seems as if he's saying things that aren't biblical. It seems as if he's saying that there's no difference between man and beast, that we're just like the animals of the world. And yet he doesn't really believe that. Throughout the text, throughout the entire book, he speaks to the difference that we are made in the image of God. God has put eternity into our hearts. He speaks to a real life after this life, and yet here it seems almost hopelessly depressing. What's he saying? Here's how I would summarize what I think he's trying to say in 18 through 21, is that this world, the absurdity of this world, will keep us constantly aware of our own mortality. That all of us are dust, and to dust we are going to return. That he is speaking from a human perspective. And he is saying, from a human perspective, from our experience in this life, the same thing will happen to us as will happen to the beast. That just as they die, he's saying, so too will we die. Just because we're humans doesn't mean we get to escape death. That he's saying that at the end of all things, if the Lord tarries, that the same thing in the end will happen to my body as happens to my dogs. That we're both from dust, and to dust we will return. That even what he says in verse 21, who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down to the earth. I don't think he's questioning whether there is an afterlife or whether there is life after this life. The image here, the word that he's using is who has experienced this. He's speaking here to the mystery of death, that he acknowledges throughout the book there is life after this life, but he's saying you don't really know what death is like until you go through it. That you're going to die just like your beasts do. And you've never experienced what happens to your soul at death. You don't get to know for sure until you're there. That all are from dust, and to dust all will return. That death is going to come to all of us. That one day, you will die. And they'll bury you. And as Herschel used to say, then they'll go back to the church and eat potato salad. That death will come to us all, just as it comes to all the world. He says, do you want to embrace the seasons of this life? You've got to learn to embrace and remember your own frailty, your own humanity, your own mortality, that you are going to die. That awareness of death grows your appreciation for life. That every day that you're not dust again is a gift from God. The time never stops. But you can learn to embrace every season of life in joy. He ends the passage in 22. So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. This is what God has given to him. His allotment in life. He says, what is good? It is to find joy and enjoyment in the now. What does it look like to learn to embrace every season of life? It is not longing for the future or pining for the past. To embrace every season of life is to enjoy right now. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. But right now, this moment, at 1 hour and 5 minutes and 20 seconds in the service, this moment is a gift that God has given to us. Receive the lot that God has given to you and find joy in it. For who can bring him to see what will be after him? Who will be able to tell you what will come tomorrow? In fact, you are not promised tomorrow. What will happen to you next month or next year or next decade? I don't know. And neither do you. So how do you know that in the end it is all going to work out, that it's all going to be okay? How do you know that you will ever get out of this endless cycle of time? How do you know that you will ever escape the seasons? All are from dust, and to dust we shall return. When the preacher says that, he's quoting from Genesis chapter 3. Why is it that we will all return to dust? In Genesis 3, after sin has come into the world and God comes to Adam and Eve and he pronounces judgment on them and on the serpent, he reminds them, just as he had told them, that because they have sinned, thus death will come to them. And he says to Adam, all are from dust, and to dust all shall return. We will return to dust because we are under the judgment of God. We are under the curse of sin. And yet even in Genesis 3, God gives them a hope. He says that he will place enmity, he will place war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, that one day one will come who will rescue them from the curse of sin, from the judgment of God. And so throughout the Old Testament, even at the time of the writing of Ecclesiastes, the people are longing and waiting on one who will save them and rescue them from being dust. But the one who is to come can't be from dust, because all who are from dust will return to dust again. The Bible says, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that they might receive adoption as sons. That Paul makes this very point in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, that the first man was from the earth. He was a man of dust. But the second man is from heaven. And as was the man of dust, so also are those who are of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, so also are those who are of the man of heaven. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, so we shall bear the image of the man of heaven. That at just the right time, the Lord Jesus Christ entered into this life. that he stepped into the absurdity and the wickedness of this world. That he stepped into the seemingly endless seasons of life, that this Jesus wept and he rejoiced. That he planted and he plucked up, he broke down and he built up. This Jesus was born and this Jesus died, that he might bear the curse of the broken world, that all those who will come to him will find hope, not just for today, but for tomorrow. If you're looking for hope in a world where time never stops, there is one escape. There is one hope. It is the man Christ Jesus who has died for us. This is why Jesus can say to us in the Gospels, don't be anxious about your life, about what you'll eat or what you'll drink or your body, what you'll put on it. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown in the oven, how will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? He says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Don't be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. There is a time for everything. There is a time for war and a time for peace. And I swear it's not too late. If you come in faith to the Lord Jesus Christ, you'll find it. And this is God's gift to man.